Hey everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to our first accessible calculator webinar ever, which is kind of exciting. I kind of had it set up like the iPad webinar I did last year, so I'm hoping this setup works. The opening code for today's webinar is going to be STEM, S-T-E-M. So give me a second while I share my screen to pull up the PowerPoint. That is also available for download in the Files pod. That is to the left of my face, I think, if you have your screen set up the same way. So the actual PowerPoint is available for download there. I was letting everyone know earlier, since I'm sharing my screen, it's harder for me to see the chat box. If you have questions, I promise I will get to them. I just may not see them right away. Okay, so without further ado, let me get to screen sharing. Okay, let me pull up the chat box so I don't miss anything. Can everybody see the PowerPoint and this area where my hand is okay? Yes, excellent. Hooray! Good deal. Like it when technology works. Okay, so obviously we're here for accessible calculators. So our agenda, I already got the welcome, opening code. This is what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to talk a little bit about firmware updates and kind of what those mean. If you're not familiar with them, it's important that we are familiar with them and that our students become familiar with them. We're going to talk obviously about some calculators and accessibility. The two in particular that we're going to be looking at today are 8 available through American Printing House for the Blind on Quota funds. And then the other calculator we will discuss is a very special calculator used on Florida standards assessments. Then I'll give your homework assignment, and then we'll do evaluations and the closing code at the end. So as I was saying, the calculators we're going to discuss today, 2 of them are from APH. So the first one is the Orion TI-30XS Multi-View Talking Scientific Calculator. Whew, I wish the names would get a little shorter, but they are what they are. Does anybody use that calculator with their students currently? Have in the past? Not yet. Do you have one, Cynthia? Do you have one, Tori? Okay, gotcha. So it's a good calculator for students in middle school, even in early elementary, I would say. But if they're going to be doing any graphing, then the Orion TI-84 Plus Talking Graphing Calculator is something you want to get your hands on as well. But they could always start out using the TI-30XS and then graduate on up to the graphing calculator. And then the last calculator we'll go over today is the SciPlus 2300 Large Display Talking Scientific Calculator. And that's the one that is has been modified. You can't just buy one straight from the company. We'll talk more about that, and it be usable for the Florida Standards Assessments. We have them here at FIMC, or you can special order them from somebody like Florida Reading and Vision. That's modified so it is actually usable on the Florida Standards Assessments. But we'll talk more about that later. These are all links to the text next to the pictures, and that takes you to the APH web store or in product information about those particular calculators. Okay, so a little bit about firmware. Does anybody know what firmware is? Do, 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 do. See people typing. Isn't it the software that runs the device? Asked Karen. See what Cynthia, and it's the systems that run the device. Yes, we have a consensus. It is. It's exactly the software that's inside the actual device. So I like to think of it like our cell phones. They require updates, right? So sometimes they act weird or something's buggy, and firmware updates are typically meant to help fix those issues that happen, or if they want to add additional features. They can do firmware updates to make the device more robust. and we'll talk more about that when we get down to the TI-84 Plus too. So it's very, very important to update them. I guess I'll go ahead and give an example now, which I'll show you later, is the TI-84 Plus you can use with a refreshable Braille display. But if you hadn't updated the firmware on the Refreshabraille 18 from APH, this guy here, this little guy, if you have not updated the firmware to that in a long time, it's not going to work with the TI-84 Plus for that Braille output. So that's why firmware is important. It helps increase the functionality and gets rid of bugs and stuff like that, just like we update our phones. So where do you find this information for APH products? It's at tech.aph.org. If we have time later, I can kind of show you how things are organized. It's pretty easy to follow. And these two links below the tech.aph.org text take you directly to the firmware updates for the Orion TI-30XS and the Orion TI-84 Plus. And so it not only is it important for us to know these things, but we should probably let our students know about it as well and teach them that these things do happen. And I think making that link between, you know, your iPad gets updates, your Android, so, you know, linking it to prior knowledge so it's easy to understand is important. Okay, so any questions about firmware before I go on? And the firmware updates for the Refreshabraille 18 will also be on the tech.aph.org. You just have to select the Refreshabraille 18. I don't see anybody typing, so I'm going to move on. All right, so your role when it comes to teaching calculator use. What is your role as the teacher of the visually impaired? Are you teaching them the entire layout of the device? Are you teaching them just the accessibility features? Are you teaching all of it? What is your role? How to use the device in general, says Kathy. Multiple attendees are typing. New concepts. Cynthia says, teaching them the basic functions and introducing them to other functions as their sighted peers are introduced to the same functions. Okay. Layout and how to use it, what order to enter information, layout and functions, functionality. So one thing that I learned about the Orion calculators is that the guy who worked at APH, who assisted the company Orbit in creating the accessible pieces to these calculators, is that he said he created them with the idea in mind that it would decrease the reliance of the teacher of the visually impaired and put more responsibility on the math teacher, because these are general calculators that all students use. These two here. TI-30XS is a calculator that is used by other students in the classroom, along with the TI-84 Plus. The only thing that's different is they have accessibility built in at the top with the Orion features. So our role is to teach the accessibility features and to teach, yes, the overall layout, where things are placed. But when it comes to entering in information, if the teacher is teaching a specific function while she's teaching the other students, because this is a familiar calculator, it should be easy for that teacher to help teach the student who is blind in that classroom as well. And granted, how many of you go to math with your students? Yep, and a lot of times we are in there because we have to provide that access on the fly. So sometimes we are teaching the functions at the same time. But two, if the student has a question about how to enter in specific functions on that calculator, they can actually go to their math teacher, and it's not something that you have to know how to do. Kathy Krumplewski and I always talk about how, you know, when these calculators first came out, it wasn't something we had time in particular to learn right away, but our students needed it. Like, it came out at the perfect time, and we just had to give it to our students and said, here's the thumb drive, here's the here's the calculator, go figure it out. If you've got questions, come back to me. And so I would work a lot on the accessibility piece with my student, and then really I put the onus back on her to go to her math teacher to help create and build that relationship. Because a lot of times what happens, we are looked at kind of as their special helper sometimes. Or one time I got called somebody's lady. So it helps to give students that ability to communicate more independently with their classroom teacher. So enough about our role, but that's what, I think his name's Ken. He was very adamant about the fact that students need to be communicating more with their math teachers. And I get it, I do. But we have to be in there sometimes too to ensure that our students are able to access everything in that classroom. Okay, so without further ado, the first calculator we're going to look at is the TI-30XS Multiview Talking Scientific Calculator. Do any of you guys have this calculator in front of you to play with? Or is everybody calculatorless? Oh, and I have this one up here, while you're answering this talking calculator. They have one that's available from APH that looks like this, the basic desktop talking calculator, but they're not available on quota funds through APH. As far as using on assessments, I don't think you're able to use these on assessments. But anyway, this is one I know a lot of people are familiar with, but it's not one we're going over today. But just know it exists. It's a talking calculator. It's out there. They're usually black. That one's white. Okay. So on the table, I have the TI-30XS. It's pretty easy to turn on, which is typically in the bottom left-hand corner of the device. The very first button on the bottom left-hand side. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat box. Don't have one on hand. 30XS. I have a student who uses the Dynavox Calculator. Oh, awesome. Very cool. And for those of you that don't know, the Dynavox is a augmentative communication device. Neat. I'd like to hear more about that sometime, Kathy. So anyway, so to turn on the device, it's in the bottom left-hand corner here.
Home screen.
Could everybody hear the calculator okay? Awesome, it's working, yay! I'm gonna knock on the wood here. Hopefully everything continues to work. Okay, so anyway, so that's the calculator. That's how to turn it on, pretty easy. I have a link to the user guide here that's available on APH's website. You'll notice this is the general calculator here. This is what, in fact, the calculator looks just like this, except up here, I think it's a solar panel on the typical classroom calculator, and it's a little bit thicker. Try to show you. So this is the Orion unit in the back that makes it accessible and goes up here across the top. So that's pretty nice. So it's something that everybody uses in the classroom. The accessibility features are across the top here, and you have A for the access key. The middle key is the silence learn key, and the key on the far right is the repeat key. So to access the actual Orion settings, so things like the volume up, volume down, increasing or decreasing the speech rate, or toggling, they have a tick sound for when you're in tables, which I'm not going to demonstrate today because that probably goes beyond my capabilities. Anyway, to get into those Orion settings, you're just going to press and hold this access key, and it's going to announce when it's in Orion settings.
Orion settings on.
Pretty easy, right? So now I can use this directional pad on the right-hand side underneath the screen to turn the volume up.
Volume 9. Volume 10.
Okay, so probably volume 10 is as high as it goes. Volume down.
Volume 8.
If I want to manipulate the speech rate, I can press the arrow to the right.
Speed 1.
And flip the calculator over while I'm at it.
Speed 2. Volume 7. Speed 3. Speed 4. Speed 4. Speed 4.
So it goes as high as speed 4. Sounds pretty fast.
Speed 3. Speed 2. Speed. Normal. Speed.
And it can go
Speed
super slow. So anyway, that's how you get into the Orion settings. And to get out, you're just going to press and hold it again.
Orion settings off.
Oh, that's super slow. I might have to change that later. So then the A key serves another function, and it has access key mode as well as the Orion settings mode. And to get into access key mode, you're just going to tap it. You're not going to press and hold that button.
8.
Oh, you know what? Excuse me. Let me put some stuff on the screen first so I can use some of these features. So I'm just going to...
8, 9, plus 5, 6, 845, 8, 9, 6, plus 5.
I'm not getting fancy. I'm just getting some
371
information on the screen. Okay. So now I'm going to go into access key mode by tapping the A. And I can review information line by line, character by character. I can move to the start of the line, the end of the line, using the keys that I've listed in this table here. So if I want to review line by line what's already on the screen, I can use the up and down.
789 plus 56, 896 plus 475, 1,371.
So it's pretty easy to navigate and use. And the number 4 can move you to the start of the line, and it's going to announce the number that's there. I can move the end of the line with 6.
1.
And I can move to the bottom of the screen if I need to.
Space.
And it's just telling me there's a space there, a blank space, nothing going on. If I wanted to get to the top, I could hit 8.
789 plus 56, 845.
Okay, so I'm going to get out of access key mode for a second by just tapping it again. And it gives an auditory clue as well, like it's a short kind of high beep and kind of a lower beep when you're in access key mode. Okay, so let's see. So you see the blinking cursor here. Just like JAWS has another cursor that's kind of behind the scenes, Orion also has one as well. It's essentially like a screen reader. So there is a revert view cursor that you can use versus the calculator cursor. And that review cursor is exactly what access key mode is allowing you to do, to navigate the information that's on the screen without messing up the calculations that you already have, if that makes sense. So your cursor, where you entered in last, will stay where it is, and that would be the calculator's cursor. Any questions so far about that? No. Awesome. Thank you, Christina. All right. So also in access key mode, you can find out the status of the battery. Is it dying? Do I have enough to make it through math class? Do I need to give it a charge before I go? The status line is going to be that STO. Let's see here. Let me get some stuff on here.
798.
So I'm going to go back into access key mode for a second by pressing it. And I'm going to hit the, see, I don't even know what that function is called. That shows you how awesome I am at math. So it's the STO right arrow key.
Degree. Degree.
It's saying degree. So the firmware version, we were talking about firmware earlier. And it's important to know which version, because when you go to the APH website, it'll tell you what they're currently at firmware-wise. So if you needed to check, you could go into access key mode and hit the memory variable key, which is up, where'd it go? Oh, sorry. It's the third key up from the bottom left.
1.00.11.
So that's telling me the firmware. It doesn't say firmware, but knowing that key, you would know that's what you're looking for. You could also get the serial number of the device, and that's something important for you and your students to know how to get to in case they have to call APH if they're having tech problems, if they need some tech support. And then the charging status you can get by using the caret key as well. All right, so some other functionality that's up here across the top. We've talked about the A key that can do access and access key mode and Orion settings, but we also have the silence and learn key, which if you press and hold it, this turns it into learn mode.
Enter learning mode.
So now a student could independently explore the keyboard and learn where everything is located, which honestly, my student did that all the time. Which was great. She was very independent in learning how to use the calculator, but there would be times where she'd get stuck and it had to do with accessibility, and so I'd go in and see if there was a way to announce or do certain things that the teacher was talking about. So then you just easily, 8,
7, 4, 5.
So it's not putting anything on the screen, it's just announcing exactly what I'm pressing. And it'll also do it with the second key as well and going into what's that layer.
Exit learning mode.
Okay, so we exit learning mode, pretty easy. And if it's talking a lot, so if I had it repeat.
798.
I wasn't fast enough.
700.
I can pause the speech, and if I hit it again, it will pick back up where it left off. I see that Tori's typing, so I'm going to take a look at see what she has to say here in a second. Oh, and this is important to know, that pressing A followed by this SL key here in the middle will turn off the accessibility until the calculator is turned off and then back on again. So maybe you need to do something on it or work with it. Can you start a calculation, enter learning mode to find a button, then finish the calculation? Weird question? No, not a weird question at all. In fact, I think that's a great question.
798.
And the answer is yes, you absolutely should be able to do that. So let's find out.
798 minus.
Okay, and say I needed to know where 4 was, so I'm going to enter my learning mode.
Enter learning mode.
Where was 4?
5.
Okay, there's 5.
4.
Okay, 4. Great.
Exit learning mode. 4. 794.
Yay! So, absolutely, yes. And that's going to be the same for the TI-84 Plus as well. You should be able to enter learning mode on any accessible calculator and find out where a key is, and then get back out and complete your function. Okay. Where was I? Yes. Oh, yeah. So back to the A followed by the SL key. If the classroom teacher needs to do something on it or you need to do something on it without the accessibility, you can turn it off. But it will last until that calculator is turned off and then back on again. So a student may accidentally do it and be like, my Orion broke. But they could have accidentally hit that key combination, which in turn would turn all the accessibility off. So that's just important to be aware of and to problem solve. And of course, the first problem solving thing they should do is turn it off and turn it back on. That's what I always do. I think it's the rule of thumb when it comes to technology. Anyway, and so the repeat key, which is this, has a little circle that's going counterclockwise with the R, is the repeat key. So it'll repeat the last thing spoken if you just give it a tap.
794.
If you press and hold it, it's going to repeat the entire screen. So if a student has a series of calculations here, they can go back and start from the top to see if they made an error or and to listen to make sure they did everything correctly. So
789 plus 97.
I silenced it just by hitting that middle button, and it should pick back up where it left off. I lied. Let's see.
789 plus 9.
Huh. I thought it picked back up where it left off. Maybe that's just on the TI-84 Plus. Anyway, so that's that function. It does not apparently pick back up with it left off. And so if you press A followed by the repeat key.
Orion settings on.
I was holding down the A, my bad.
Orion settings off.
it will spell out the last spoken text. So I think this will do character by character.
Orion settings
Or
on.
not.
Orion settings off. Orion settings off.
Never mind, not the character by character mode. We'll get to that in a sec. We already talked about that. I apologize. It will repeat the last thing that was said. So whatever your last function was that you completed, it's going to repeat that. And I think that's it here. Any questions about the TI-30XS before we move on? I want to mention too that we do have these available for loan in our professional library if you want to try before you buy. I always recommend that before spending money on something that may not work for your student or spending quota dollars. So please feel free to contact me and see if there's one available for loan, and I'll send you everything that you need to use it. Okay, if there's no questions about that, I'm going to turn it off. Or oh, I want to mention this. I don't know how long it takes.
30 seconds for APD.
That's what I was waiting for. So APD means auto power down. So that's exactly what it's telling me. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it off before it tells me auto power down. All right. So the next one we're going to talk about is the Orion TI-84 Plus Talking Graphing Calculator. And there's a link to the user guide on this page, again, that's on the APH website. So as you can see, it's typical TI-84 Plus, but at the top, they have an Orion unit. It's a little bit thicker too because of the Orion unit, and you can see that it has speakers on the left and the right side. It also has a series of, sorry, this is almost as tall as my hover cam, of different inputs and outputs on the top. It has a micro B and a mini B USB port. This all gets very confusing. It has a charging port that kind of looks almost like an audio jack. This one over here that my finger is touching, this other one that looks similar to an audio jack, is actually for a special plug that allows you to update the firmware. So before I forget, to update the firmware for your Orion TI-84 Plus, you must purchase or hunt one down in your school a GraphLink cord. So this is a TI calculator GraphLink cord, and they sell it through a variety of different places. I can't remember where I purchased mine. I think they run about 25 bucks, but this is the only thing that's going to allow you to plug your TI-84 Plus into the computer so that it can speak to the TI-84 Plus software that you have to download in order to do the firmware update. I never can remember how to do it because you're only doing it, you know, once every so often, but the directions are pretty clear and they're all written out nice and concisely, and they tell you everything that you need, and even including links of the types of cords and cables that you may need. When I was working at a high school and I didn't have this cord and I desperately wanted that firmware update, I contacted the math department, the science department, everybody, and finally people were writing me back and they told me the specific math teachers to go to see if they had one. And thankfully, actually, my student's teacher had one like shoved way back in a drawer. She's like, I don't know, it's really old, it might work. So I suspect they've been using the same cord for many, many years. But it did work, so I was very excited about that. Fun piece of knowledge, we have these available to loan out. So if you need to update your firmware, contact me and I'm happy to get you a GraphLink cord. You just have to send it back. Any questions? It does not come with the GraphLink cord. It comes with the USB cord to charge it, but that cord doesn't allow it to like speak to the software. So I don't know. It's the way the calculator's designed. I think, Christina, I don't know if it was you. Somebody was at Armwood previously that, so you saw the TI. Is this a newer version? Oh, hold on. I'm going to back up just one second. So this one, Christina, is a new calculator that they've released, and it's more appropriate for like later elementary and early middle school, I would say, depending on what kind of classes your student's taking. No problem. Oh, you used to work at Armwood, Tori. Aha, and now Christina does. Anyway, all right. So continuing on with the Orion TI-84 Plus. I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to Christina's question. It doesn't talk. It could be it needs a firmware update. And sometimes the Orion, this is another good thing to talk about, is this unit sometimes gets out of sync with the actual calculator and you have to reset it. And how you do that is by turning off the calculator totally. You press these two buttons together and turn it back on. Sometimes you have to do it several times, and sometimes you just have to plug it back into charge and do it, and then it works. Something you have to play with, but try resetting it, Christina, to see if that will, after a good night's charge, like really charge up the Orion unit and then reset it and see if that works. And if you have any questions, give me a call and I'll try to help. Okay, so anyway, Orion unit here at the top. You can see this has the layout kind of like a braille cell on the left-hand side here. So you have the left side, top, middle, bottom, right side, top, middle, bottom, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then on the right-hand side, you have a directional pad with a center key that's called the home key, but it's also the enter key, and we'll talk more about that when we go into the preferences. So over here you have the general. I'm gonna push down my camera a little bit. It might mess with the microphone because the microphone's actually built into this little hover cam, which is pretty darn cool. Okay, so you see here they have different labels on them as well as the pictures that are on top of them. So on the surface level, you have the repeat key, which is similar to like the TI-30XS that we looked at earlier. It has a repeat key as well. And that's the top left key. Then the middle left key is going to be volume down. Oh, it helps if I turn it on. So bottom left again to turn on.
Home screen.
Something else about the TI-84 Plus is it also provides haptic feedback, so it vibrates to give some tactile feedback to the user when you turn it on, especially and in the graphing mode, which we'll talk more about. It uses the haptic feedback. So this is how you manipulate the volume. Pretty easy.
Volume 10.
Then on the left side bottom, you have the pause key, which will pause the speech, and this one you can hit it again and it will pick up where you left off. On the right hand side on the top, you have your preferences key, and you manipulate the preferences by using this directional pad that's on the right hand side, and we'll talk more about that later. Then the middle right side, we have the volume up, and then we have the mute key on the bottom right hand side, and that will just stop. That will turn off the voice completely. Okay. Any questions about those features? Okay, moving on. So the preferences, which I mentioned earlier, you just hit preferences and it's going to tell you that it's in the preferences menu. So this is where you can manipulate the graph options, speech options. If it starts up in a silent mode, you can turn off the speech completely. You can check the battery status and that firmware version. You can also get the serial number from the preferences menu. You can reset all the settings to the default factory settings, and then of course just to exit the preferences menu. So we're going to go ahead and hit preferences. Actually, before I do that, because it'll talk over me, once I hit preferences, to navigate through the preferences menu, it's a list just like I have up on the screen. So you just use the down arrow to scroll through the menu items. If you want to select that menu item, you're going to hit the home or enter key, which is the center button on the directional pad. So I'm going to go ahead and
Preferences menu.
Can you
Graph options.
and it announces the first menu item, which is graph options. And within graph options, there's lots of different things you can manipulate, certain indicators, which I'll demo a little bit later. Like if you have two graphs on your graph screen, you can turn on an indicator for where they intersect. So it'll be a different sound. Okay, so, oh, I almost started using my computer keypad to manipulate the Orion.
Speech options.
So speech options. So if I want to go in here, I'm going to hit.
Betty's voice. Selected.
Tells me Betty's voice is selected. What other voices does it have? So to navigate through that particular menu item's options, I'm going to use the right arrow key. Or not.
Ursula's voice.
Sorry, going to use the down arrow key. I want to press
Voice.
something. That's voice.
Pitch. Pitch 3. Default. Selected. Pitch 2.
That's
Pitch.
pitch. Sorry, let me get out of pitch.
Speech options.
And so to go backwards to get out of the menus I was in, just like a computer, I'm using the left arrow key. Okay, so speech options.
Voice.
Voice. That's what I want.
Ursula's voice.
Okay.
Wendy's voice.
Wendy's voice.
Rita's voice.
Rita.
Kid's voice.
This is the creepiest voice of all. Kid's voice.
Rita's voice. Kid's voice.
Just wanted you to hear it one more time. Anyway, so I'm not the biggest fan of the voices on here.
Voice. Default.
That's the default voice, so we're going to stick with that. To select Paul's voice, I think it is, I'm going to hit the enter key.
Paul's voice. Default selected.
And to get back out, I'm going to hit that left arrow
Speech
key.
options.
And there I am at speech options, and I can continue through the preferences list. I'm going to go to my firmware version.
Braille options.
Oh, Braille options. That's really
30
cool.
seconds for APD.
And because I haven't touched anything on the calculator, it tells me it's going to power down.
Five.
I'm just going to hit a number.
Blank. Blank.
Oh.
Blank.
It took me out of preferences because I hit a number. So anyway, to go back in, that one sounds a little muffled. Okay, I'll change the voice real
References
quick.
menu. Red speech op. Braille options. Silent startup mode.
Oops.
Braille op. Speech options. Voice. Pitch. Voice. Paul's voice. Harry's voice. Frank's voice.
Is that one okay?
Betty's voice.
Dennis's voice.
Betty's voice.
Any preferences, guys? I like the man's voice. Denise. oh, Dennis. The man's voice, so let's go back to Dennis.
Ursula's voice. Betty's voice.
Dennis's voice.
Dennis's voice.
Dennis's voice selected.
All right.
Voice. Speech options.
Oh, it's all right. Everybody votes
Graph
for Dennis.
options.
Dennis wins. You're the winner today, Dennis. All right.
Reset all.
So that's the preferences and how you navigate preferences. Any questions about that? No? Okay, great. Moving on. So just like in the TI-30XS, you can read the current line, you can read the entire screen, you can read line by line. So let's put some stuff in here.
Minus 896.
I'm just gonna
Negative
hit some numbers.
891. 5896 minus 452. 5444.
So if I wanted to read the current line, I am going to hit, oh, sorry, this is in combination with different keys. I need to mention that. And again, I want to review before I continue the the review cursor versus the on-screen cursor. So when you're using these commands, you're using that review cursor, and the blinking cursor that's on the screen shouldn't actually be moving. So if I hit the home key,
Blank.
it's telling me, okay, I'm at a blank spot here. That's my current line. If I want to read the entire screen, I can press and hold up.
Blank. 5 minus 896. Negative 891. 5000.
I paused it because I want to demonstrate that this does work. Please work for me.
896 minus 452. 5444.
So you don't need to hear the whole thing, but you get the idea. It reads the entire screen. So now if I wanted to read from the current location of the cursor, I can press and hold down.
Blank.
It's going to tell me it's blank. But if I actually move the cursor with the directional pad that's on the actual calculator and not on the Orion unit, So just remember that we're talking about the directions on the Orion unit to use that review cursor. This directional pad down here on the actual calculator is going to move
5,000.
calculator
5,000.
cursor.
Negative 5 minus 896.
Okay, so again, if I wanted to read from the current review of the cursor, I'd press and hold down. And you can read to the end of the line from the current location. You can read line by line by using the right and left arrow
5
keys.
minus 8, 9, 6, space.
So if students want to be sure that they actually entered in everything correctly, they can use these review keys to ensure that they did everything right. Any questions about those? So that's how you navigate the text with the review key. And that does not mess up. So if they needed to go back to be sure, yes, I needed to put in 5,896, or they needed to put a cosine, or whatever function they're putting in without messing up their current calculation, the review cursor is what they want to use. They don't want to use this, because then they have potential for messing up the calculation and functions that they've already put in. Make sense? Looking at my chat box. Y'all still with me? Okay, good, thanks. Sometimes it's hard talking to the computer. You don't know. All right. So trace mode. Oh, graphs. This is my favorite part of this calculator. I absolutely love graphs, and this is why I was so excited when it came out for my student. I didn't ask about this one. Does anybody have this calculator? Oh yes, Tori, you feel my excitement. It is the absolute best part. How many of you are using this with your students, or have students that are going to need to learn how to use it this year or next year? Need to relearn some things. You'll need it next year. Oh, Karen, yes. Excellent. Okay, all right, so we're going to move on to play with graphs, and Lisa's using the 30XS. Awesome. Good deal. All right, so graphing. Yay. So before I start graphing stuff and showing you what all this actually means, you'll know to actually enter in a graphing function.
Y1 selected. Y1 equals equate.
Make it stop. You're going to hit the Y equals key. So that's going to bring up where you would enter in all the functions to plot a graph. Okay. Then toward the right hand side underneath the screen, you have trace and graph mode. The difference between these two is that in trace mode, the cursor, the little blinking cursor, and the review cursor actually trace the graph. And so that gives you the X and Y coordinates and where that point actually is. Graph mode is going to give you a free cursor. So it's out there past the graph. It's not touching, it gets away from the graph and doesn't actually touch it. And it's announcing X and Y coordinates that may not be useful for the student at that time, unless it's like a non-contiguous graph, something like a stat plot. Then they would want to be in graph mode, but I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But in trace mode, it plays a sound or it announces coordinates, and you have to toggle between those modes depending on what your student wants to listen to, and I'll show you how to do that. And graph mode is specifically good with sonograph, which is for those graphs that have like scatter plots and things like that. So there are some functions to replay a graph, which is shift and preference. So that mute key that's in the bottom right hand corner is actually also a shift key, so it has a dual function. And so you'll see at the top, the preference key also has teeny tiny blue writing that says playback. So that's how you play back a graph. To toggle between speech mode and tone mode, which I'll demonstrate in a second, you would do shift and toggle, or the repeat key. Oh, I forgot to cover speech rate. Speech rate you can manipulate by hitting the control key and the volume up and down keys.
Speed 7, speed 8, speed 9.
Just demonstrate
speed
that real
8,
quick.
speed 7.
Okay, so there you go. So it's pretty easy to do. All right, so let's enter an actual function or graph. So I'm going into y equals. If you have your calculator, you can play along. And we're going to do x squared plus 2 in y1. So I'm going to go to alpha.
Alpha.
Oh, I didn't tell you how to go into learn mode on this. It's really easy, and it tells you every time you start the calculator. You can either hit the second key 3 times. So
help on. Second on.
So help on, and it told me, okay, your second key's on, and then I can go.
X stat open bin.
So it'll tell me what keys I'm pressing, and I can
help off.
Press it 3 times again quickly to turn it off, or you can press and hold it down. So you choose. Either way, press and hold or triple tap. Okay, so back to entering a graph. So we have x. Always have to look where my x is. There we go.
X. Y1 equals X equation enabled graph stylus line.
Telling me exactly what I have in there, and I'm going to go to x squared.
Squared.
And we're going to do plus 2.
2.
And I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to go down to
Y2 equals equation disabled.
y2. Okay, and now I'm going to do, let's do negative x. And remember, let me pull up just a smidge. Calculator's too tall. So you can't use the minus key when you're trying to do a negative. You actually do have to use the negative key. So it's going to be negative alpha x
Y2 equals negative X equation enabled graph stylus line.
squared.
Squared.
Okay, and then we're just going to
Y3 equals
put a
equation
straight line
disabled.
on here. We're just going to do, no,
Equation
actually,
enabled.
I take that back. We're not going to do 8. Say I accidentally, like I don't want 8 now and I want to delete. I actually do have to arrow the cursor
8.
over on top of the number I want to delete and then hit the delete key.
Equation disabled.
Okay, so let's do
2.
2. No, let's not do 2. Sorry. I'm going to delete again.
2.
I'm getting good practice here.
Delete. Equation disabled.
Let's do 4.
4.
There we
Equation
go.
enabled.
Now I'm done. So I'm going to hit trace mode.
Trace. Graph screen.
Uh-oh, I have a stat plot on there from earlier. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that plot real quick, and I apologize that it is there. Give me a second. Bear with me.
Stat. Stat edit menu. Edit. L2 open bin. 1 closed bin. Equals 2. Delete. Delete. Delete.
I know there's a way
Delete.
to delete them all.
Delete.
I'm just going to do this
L1
real quick.
delete. 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 Delete.
Okay, so that should get rid of that. Let's go back to
Trace.
trace.
Dimension 0. Quit. Home screen.
I broke
Operation
it.
Y equals. Plot 1 selected. Y1 equals X squared
think I
plus
need
2
to-
equation enabled graph.
Sorry. Give me a second.
Second on. Stat plot. Stat plot 1 on. Plot 1 selected. Off. Off selected.
Okay, there we go.
Sec quit. Home screen. Y equals. Trace.
There we go. That's much better. So let it do its thing.
Playing equation 1.
Okay, you heard it say playing equation 1, and it played equation 1. So you'd have to actually navigate through the equations to get to the one you want to hear, and you'd use that playback feature that I was discussing earlier. So say I wanted to hear this again. I wanted to hear equation 1 again, which is the Y1. So I'm going to hit shift and playback.
Playing equation 1.
Well, now I want to hear, let's say, equation 2. I'm not going to use my Orion to navigate. You're actually going to use the calculator pad.
Y2 equals negative X squared graph stylus line.
Okay, so it told me that I went to my Y2 graph and I used the down key on the directional pad to navigate. So if I wanted to go back to the first function, the Y1, I'd hit the up arrow key. Same thing to get to my third one.
Y3 equals 4 graph stylus line. Y1 equals X squared.
So I went back to Y1. So now I actually want to trace the graph. So I'm going to use my right and left keys to move my cursor, which you see blinking there. I'm going to move this down just a smidge. So you hear it playing the different tones. as it goes up. It definitely gets higher pitched. So these are important listening skills that you would have to work on with your student to understand what they're hearing, and also providing that tactile graph too, not just the listening portion, while they're learning how to interpret what these sounds mean. We can't just expect them to listen and understand what this parabola looks like, or what a parabola is. Okay, so it plays the different tones. Now, if I want it to actually announce the X and Y coordinates, I'm going to change my setting. So now I'm going to toggle to the speech mode. So I'm going to hit Shift and toggle.
Speech mode.
Tells me I'm in speech mode. I'm there. So now
X equals 1.7021277. Y equals 4.89723886.
So you can change what it announces. Back in the preferences menu, you remember you heard graph options earlier. You can have it announce just the x-axis, just the y. You can have it announce, you can have it switch which way it announces it. So whether you want y first or x first or x first or y first. So those are some different indicators that you can turn on and off in that preferences menu. It's pretty customizable to what your student needs. Oops. See, I tried using that directional pad. Not going to work.
With 3, x equals 1.063828.
Any questions about that?
Y equals 3.1.
Okay, I don't see any questions coming in. So what happens if I go into graph mode with this?
Graph screen. Graph free cursor.
So you heard it say graph mode, free cursor now. So it's a graph free cursor. So now I can go out into nowhere land. So it's very important that your students understand that they have to be in trace mode in order to get the accurate announcements about where their cursor is on the function that they graphed. Okay, so another thing, let me go back to trace.
Y1 equals x squared plus 2x equals...
I routed my cursor right back onto the first graph that I was on. So what happens when we go into the negative? I talked about haptic feedback. So a little bit more about that is if you start to go below the x-axis, you get vibrations.
Y3 equals 4 graph style is y. Y1 equals x squared. Y2 equals negative x.
Okay, there we go. So now if I start navigating this graph,
x equals
it's supposed to vibrate. I may have turned off that function on accident, but it would vibrate as it was going in the negative. So if you had a line that was crossing between the positive and negative, once they crossed over that axis, it would start vibrating to let them know they've gone into the negative. Make sense? Yay, thank you. Awesome. Okay. So we talked about trace mode, replaying the graph, speech and tone mode, navigating the different graphs. We talked about what happens in graph mode, a little bit about graph preferences. So we're going to go into the preferences menu real quick.
Preferences menu. Graph options.
Okay, so I want graph options, so I'm going to hit home.
Announcement.
So I can announce the coordinates.
X before Y. Default. Selected.
So it's X before Y now. And this is where you can manipulate whether you want just X, just Y, whatever you want announced.
Coordinate announcement. Sounds.
So what kind of sounds play and how to manipulate those sounds are in there. So this said indicators. Sorry, I talked over it.
Sounds. Indicators.
Indicators. So this is where we want to go in.
Axis cross indication.
So axis cross indication. So if they move into another axis, what do you want to know? So if you want to manipulate that, you could do so by pressing
on. Selected.
And it said on, so that it's already on. It indicates that for you now. The default is usually off for a lot of these indicators, so you do have to go in and turn them on.
Axis cross indication. Axis stick indication. Axis cross indication. Axis stick indication. Intersection indication.
Intersection indication. This is what I was looking for. So if your graphs intersect and you need to find that, you definitely want to turn on that indicator.
On. Selected.
So it's on. Okay. So great. I'm glad to hear that. I'm going to hit preferences to get out of preferences.
Exit preferences menu.
Tells me what I did. Okay, so now I want to go.
Y3 equals 4 graph. Y1 equals X. Y2 equals Y3 equals 4 graph style is locked.
So I wanted to get to that nice line I have there going across the screen, and I'm going to navigate that.
X equals 1 point. X equals
I want to
0.
know where the
Y
intersection
equals 4.
is.
X equals with 1. X
Did you hear
equals
that
negative
beep?
1.276596.
Like a bird
Y
chirping
equals
in the
4.
middle of it. Got one person typing. Yes, awesome. So that's that indicator that you have an intersection there. So that's where they could look up what the X and Y is and write down that intersection. Any questions about graphing here? Not yet. Awesome. And a lot of the functionality, I remember this is why firmware updates were so important to me. One, because of that Braille function to begin with, but also they hadn't fixed it where it was only announcing, I think, the X. You couldn't announce the Y coordinates yet, and we were desperately needing those Y coordinates, and so that was a firmware update way back in the day when they first came out. So they've definitely improved a lot on the accessibility of these calculators, and that's why it's really, really, really important to update that firmware. And in fact, at the next Working with the Experts or something, maybe we should have like a firmware updating party. Doesn't that sound so exciting? We can all update firmware together. And that way, if we all have problems, we can help each other out. All right, another feature that this has is called sonograph, which I don't have a lot of experience with, and it is only used when you're in graph mode. And it's for those like scatter plot points that I was talking about earlier, and you kind of saw an example on my screen there earlier. Excuse me. You can use it in trace mode, and you can get the coordinates of where those plots are, but it's not going to play you a picture of what that looks like if you were to do the shift and playback. So the sonograph plays those non-contiguous points, and that's why they created it. And you have to manipulate a lot of the preferences, like you want to turn off intersection announcements and things like that, so it doesn't interfere with those particular points. There is an example here. If anybody's curious to go through it, if you want me to demo this, I will. Yes, no? Sure, why not? Okay. All right, so we're gonna clear all this off. I'm gonna go to y equals.
Y1 equals delete.
I'm gonna delete all this out.
Delete.
Okay.
Move to applied line.
So to enter into a stat plot, I gotta make sure that they're. Oops, sorry.
Stat plot. Stat plot slide one off.
That it's in fact on. So let me go enable
Plot one selected.
stat
Unselected.
plot 1. I'm gonna turn it on.
Unselected.
Okay. And my X and Y list is L1 and L2. And then of course you have the different
Scatter
type
plot.
of scatter plot graphs.
Scatter plot select.
It's talking over me. Different graphs that you can choose, and we're just going to go with that initial scatter plot graph. Okay, so then to actually enter in the stats, I'm going to go to Stat.
Stat edit menu.
I'm going to
Edit.
go to Edits.
L1 open pin. 1
Okay.
close pin. Equals.
So this is directly from the APH user guide. They have examples of how to enter in this information, so you don't have to get all creative and come up with your own information to enter in. They provide it all right there for you to practice these different skills. So we'll do 1,
L1
2,
L1 open pin. 3. L1 4. L1 open pin. 5.
5.
L1 open pin. 6 close 6. L1 open pin. 7. L2 open pin.
Use the right arrow
1
key
close
to go
pin.
over
Equals.
and go to
2.
2.
L2 open 3. L2 open pin. 4. L5. L6. L2 open pin. 6 closed. L2 open. L2 open pin. L2 open pin.
Sorry.
5. L2 open pin. 5.
Okay. All right. So there are my stats. They're entered in. So now I'm going to go to graph mode.
Graph. Dimensions mismatch here.
no.
Quit. Home screen. Home screen.
Oops. Maybe I broke it.
Stat. Stat edit menu. L2 open pin. 1 closed pin. Equals 2.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Ah, there we go. Dimensions.
L2 open pin. 6 7. L2 open pin. 7 closed pin. Graph. Graph screen. Graph
now-
precursor.
We have these little points here, and it usually plays it right away. No, I'm sorry. This is the one where you actually have to have it play back.
Border screen center.
Sounds interesting, right? So you can change how much of the screen it's going to actually play back, and it plays from left to right. So you can do full screen, half screen, quarter screen, and you manipulate that by using these arrow keys.
Aim screen center.
It's hard to hear those little tiny points, but that's what the sonograph does. That's what it is. You can go into trace mode.
Cannot play stat plots. X equals 2. X equals 3. Y equals 4.
It tells you exactly where those plots are. Any questions? Yeah, I know, it's super cool. I just love this calculator so much. It's just so nice how accessible it is, and just it creates equal access in the classroom, which is what we want for our kids. So I just think it's pretty awesome. So anyway, so that's here if you guys want to play with that, but also go to the user guide and look at all the things that they have listed in there. The best part about this, actually I think the graph part is pretty much the best. Also, you can emboss from this. I tried it a long time ago when it first came out, and I think it was just kind of lacking in the technology. I have not tried it in a while, and that's one of my things to do this summer, is I want to play with this with embossing graphs directly from it. I would get them to emboss in like tiny squares with using Tiger Software Suite, and I was just like, oh, this isn't going to work. But anyway, they've shown nice big graphs with it that they've embossed. So I need to figure out where my breakdown is and how to correct that and actually make it happen. So anyway, you can emboss with this, and so students can emboss a graph to actually touch to see what they did, and they can also print as well, and so they can print out or even save the image to their computer to email to their math teacher to show the work that they did. How cool is that? But you have to be able to do that with the TI-84 Plus software that you would use for those firmware updates. And so the unfortunate thing about that TI-84 Plus software, maybe they've improved it since last year, but it's just not the most accessible. So sometimes there needs to be a little bit of assistance there. But it is pretty darn cool. Okay, so Braille. Are they compatible with Windows and Apple products? I know the TI-84 Plus software is compatible on Windows-based computers. I'm not too sure about Apple. I think I remember seeing just an executable file, so my hunch is that it's only available on Windows. So, but I'm not 100% on that. I'll have to look. Or you can look for me. Braille. Yes. So what's super cool is that you can hook up a refreshable Braille display to this device, and it will output UEB or Nemeth. You heard the Braille option in the preferences menu earlier, and so you can actually have the literacy component of using Nemeth or UEB so they can check their work, not necessarily relying on that auditory output. They can check their work. Unfortunately, you can't do Braille input yet, but it sounded like that's something they're possibly working on. So, with that being said, this is where you need a different connector. You can't use the USB device that came with the calculator. Well, you could, I guess. Well, I won't get too complicated. So anyway, so you can buy a special cord that has a micro B to mini cable. So the difference, let me see if I can find I had a micro B here a second ago. Sorry. There we go. So you've got your mini B, which is this guy, and he's just slightly fatter than your micro B. It's all blurry. There you go. So you can see the difference. But it has to be a cord that goes from that to that. What we did is we actually used the cord that comes with the refresher braille. We actually used the cord that came with the refreshable braille display, and we just bought a USB adapter. So this fits on the end of the USB cord that you use to charge your refresher braille 18, and you just buy a micro B adapter, plug it in, plug it into the micro B port. My braille display connected. It fluttered and it recognized the braille display right away. How cool is that? So there's actually braille on there, and it's showing a number. What if you can? I don't know if you can see it. Anybody see the braille on there? Yay! There's a 5. Absolutely. Yep. So, and that's where the cursor is on the screen. So if we move the cursor.
5,444. 5,896 minus 400.
And obviously it's in Nemeth code right now because it's the drop numbers. Yes, I know, Tori. I love this so much. It's just super cool. So it has to be, unfortunately, it's not compatible with other braille displays yet. It has to be a BAUM, B-A-U-M, human interface display, or device, sorry. It is a display, but it has to be a human interface device, HID for short. So BAUM is the one that actually, if any of you went to ATIA or had the chance to go to the vendor hall, they make refreshable braille displays. They're the ones that built like the back end of this APH one. So it is a BAUM human interface device, and that's why it works with this calculator. But it sounded to me like they're trying to open that up to other devices. So stay tuned for that. And that's why those firmware updates are important again, because I'm sure when that comes around, you're going to need to do a firmware update. So yes, love how comprehensive it is. Accommodates auditory and tactile. I know, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I can't wait. I don't know if you guys know that APH is working on a tactile graphics display that actually have pins that pop up to show tactile graphics. It's called the Graffiti. It's super, super cool, but who knows when it'll be released. But I foresee now that you could hook up this calculator to the Graffiti, and it's going to show you the graph right there in real time. Oh, it makes my just gets me so excited. It's excellent. So anyway, APH, they're coming up with some really creative solutions to access to tactile graphics, and I'm hoping that's one of the ways this will go. Okay, so that's the Orion TI-84 Plus, and some of its accessibility features. I encourage you to sit down and just go through what's on the user guide. That's the only way you're going to really, it's all going to really sink in and make sense. Okay, everybody's favorite topic, Florida standards assessments and calculators. Please be aware that last year, I know a lot of people used to use that TI-36X that was available from APH. I don't believe it was on Quota funds previously, but it was allowable for assessments in Florida. That is no longer the case. And none of these calculators that I have showed you so far are allowable on Florida standards assessments. That's the unfortunate part, because these are the things that students are going to use in the classroom for access, right? So last year when we found that out, it is totally unfortunate. Last year when we found that out, we hustled trying to figure out the quickest solution to get some accessible calculators that would be allowable. And what we ended up finding was that the Sci Plus 2300, oh, I have that. Hold on a second. Sorry. Let me move things around. I'm so glad you can't see the rest of my desk. It's terrible. I'm stuck. Hold on. Oh. Okay. Are you guys ready for this? This is the Sci Plus 2300. That has, yes, oh wow. That is modified to meet the calculator accommodations for Florida standards assessments. It's quite large, as you see, and it's very, very different, but they removed
30 seconds for AVD.
That's okay,
Second
you can
thought.
turn off now. It's a very different calculator to what our students are used to using, as you can see. We do have these available for loan. I'll go over that process a little bit later, but you can't just buy a Sci Plus 2300 from any company and it be allowable. It has to be one that has been modified to meet the Florida standards. So you can see even on the, see how you guys can read this, even on their little user guide that comes in the box, note, this Sci Plus calculator has been modified to comply with state of Florida requirements. Please refer to the inside user guide. They even went through, these people are so nice, they like marked through everything that you can do with this calculator, but that was taken off due to Florida's modifications. They crossed through it. There's even pin marks through certain pages like, nope, can't do that. So it tells you everything. It does look a little archaic, but it works, and we only are loaning it out to students who need a talking calculator. So it's not meant for students with low vision because we only have a limited supply. But if you're, you know, it depends. You need to email us and ask and give us your particular situation. So I did include the link to the user guide for this calculator, but just please be aware it does not reflect the changes like the one that comes in the box, like it likes to tell you. And the voice only works with earbuds. So unfortunately, I can't really demo how this sounds. I don't think I could get it loud enough. Let's see. I'm going to turn it. Is it on? Hello? Let me... Yeah, it's on, but the voice is so low unless you have the earphones on to actually hear it. So the accessibility features are just, it's very bare bones, but it does have a voice, and you have to turn it on and off by using the second and the voice key here that I have my index finger on. It has a little face with like a voice coming out. Your enter key or return key is here to enter a function. They do have some settings, and they have a brightness kind of toggle over here on the right hand side of the calculator. So I can't really demo it too well here because you can't hear the voice because it only works with earbuds, but it's very easy to use, but we recommend, of course, that your students get practice with it before testing. Do not sit down on an already stressful test with a student and give them this calculator, please. We will give you that time to have to practice with your students. Okay, so the information required for a calculator loan, we need the student's first name, their grade, what assessment are they taking, is it FSA 7th grade math, is it an EOC, and the dates the calculator that are need for testing and practice. That's very important because we have to kind of create this crazy schedule where we have calculators going this way and we know this calculator is coming back, so because we don't have a whole lot of them. We did order a little more this year, so maybe it won't be such a big issue this year, fingers crossed. We need the address of where it's going to go and the name of the individual receiving the calculator. So if it's not going to be you at that school who's receiving that calculator, please let us know who. And then, of course, we need justification. We need the documentation saying, yes, this student requires a talking calculator to access math. So it could be the assessment accommodations page. That would be the first thing that we'd like to see if it's on there, because if it's something they're using daily, then it can be on their assessment accommodations. It could be the present level of performance. It could be from the FBLMA. Looking over at the questions real quick. I have one that looks like this, but it doesn't talk. So yes, Michaela, they actually have one that is just for students with low vision. It doesn't have the voice. But two, does it have the little voice guy on it, Michaela? Because then I'm wondering, because ours only works with earbuds, so I don't know if that could be it. Why it's not talking if you haven't plugged in earbuds. I don't know. Oh, well then there you go. It's just for students with low vision then, because they do have two different versions. So that's the documentation supporting the need for the talking calculator. Any questions about that? And you would just email all this information to me, and then I'd get a calculator out to you. Why won't they allow other calculators they're using in class? What about it makes it unfair? Great question, Kathy. It's because the calculators have functions that are not allowable on Florida standards assessments. So the school may purchase calculators that are similar to like the TI-84 Plus, but they have taken off all those allowable functions. But more than likely they're providing some other calculator the other students haven't used in class before too. Remember in FCAT they had the special little FCAT calculators. So kind of the same idea there. Okay, so that's about assessment. If you have any other questions or need clarification, please don't hesitate to email me. Seems almost easier for a student to use an app. But still my heart, an abacus. Yes, absolutely. Students should be using an abacus. That's a very good and important point, Cynthia. Okay, ooh, great resource. As I was doing some research, TSBVI, or Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, their distance learning site has like, oh my gosh, their YouTube channel is filled with videos of teaching the TI-84 Plus. It is incredible. I was just in awe. I could have spent hours just watching them teach this device. It's super cool. So, but just the resources for this particular calculator are incredible. So if you get stuck or a gen ed teacher gets stuck, that's a good place to look. And it's all organized by teaching specific functions like entering in equations, graphing, finding the Y value, whatever. It's very, very cool. And they even have one that's like a general overview. And then I have included the link here to the Florida Department of Education website that goes to those specific calculator guidelines. So it tells you all the functions that are not allowable. They do not provide a list of allowable calculators, and they do that because it's up to the districts to locate those calculators. That's it, guys. Whew! I was very nervous about time. We did it. One thing I did want to mention if I had time, which now I have a little bit of, is that I don't know about Android devices. I'm begging for one. I will get one eventually so I can actually say, and Android devices do this. But I know on the iPhone, my student would do this a lot when she didn't charge her calculator overnight, or she forgot it, left it in a different class, all those wonderful things. She would use her iPhone with VoiceOver to use the calculator on there, because when you have it, in portrait mode, it's a regular little calculator, but if you flip it into landscape, it turns into a scientific calculator. And she would just sometimes have to use that on the fly if nothing else was available. So, hey, she found a tool that worked for her that got the job done at the time. Yep, it absolutely does. Their calculator is accessible. So that's another great feature of the iPhone, or if they had an iPod Touch or iPad. So yeah, so we're going to do evaluations here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Stop sharing. Okay. Excuse me. Yeah, great idea to improvise. I agree. Hey, she was innovative. Let me get to the survey real quick so you guys can fill that out, and then I'll come back for more questions if there are any, and then give you your homework. I'll go over the homework while you're filling these out. So please fill out these evaluation questions. Greatly appreciated. The homework will be writing a lesson plan on teaching the accessibility of one of the calculators discussed today, with SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me about the homework assignment. Oh, that Braille Note Touch. One day we will have one of those. I know a couple districts that have them and are waiting for them. One thing, when I talked to HumanWare at ATIA, they said they're going to start providing tech support webinars, like where they could just connect with you real quick through a webinar, much like this, but they're using a different platform. I can't remember what, I think it's Zoom or something, which is one I want to try because I hear the accessibility of that is quite good. Let's see, what else you guys want to learn about? Refreshable Braille displays, my favorite. Typing program for students who are blind. Oh, there's a new one out by Yes Accessible. I can't remember what it's called, but it's super cool, and they have a nice free trial. And they were so kind at the beginning of the school year, this Yes Accessible company, that they're like, if you were testing out our product over the summer, we've decided that we'll renew your, not the license, but the trial, so that you can go ahead and start using it at the beginning of the year. I'm like, what an awesome company to do that. So anyway, I'm so excited you'll be using the graphing features next year. I can't see who said it, but yay! Okay, I think everybody has entered something here, so I'm going to go back to share mode. And let's see. I think that's it. So I think I'm going to end recording here. Oh, about the closing code. You guys need that, right? What did I write? Is access, ACCESS, access. Okay. Well, thank you guys. I'm gonna